Hello, everybody. Hi, Louise. It's so good to be together.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
always good to be with you. It's been many years now that we've known each other.
I know, I was really thinking about that the other day when we were meeting up for the Modern Midwife meetups
Yes.
in Preston. Do you remember? It was so good to be part of that journey with you, and now to see all the work you're doing to support families
Oh,
and continuing in our midwifery journey. It's really wonderful to be together today to talk about maternal nutrition and think about that both as mothers and women ourselves, and then think about how we can better support families that we're caring for in our work as midwives and maternity and perinatal care professionals. So, welcome to everybody that's joining us. I think there was like over 350 people ready
yeah.
to be with us, and I'm just here at home. I've just welcomed my lovely son Seamus back from America this morning, so I'm here with the children actually, which is unusual.
Oh, yeah, but lovely though, isn't it? Because he's been there for a while. You must have really missed him.
Oh yeah, honestly, it's been lovely because the teachers have been really kind, letting Bill and Shane and Betsy come with me to meet them, but they are milling around. So
You might hear some.
honestly, Will's just come in, just snuck in and had a whisper to me, which is actually just said, "Can I have chocolate spread on wrap?"
On
Well,
rap. Okay, that's
when we're talking about nutrition today.
yeah, exactly. Rather apt.
Yeah. So yeah, we wanted to take a moment to think about over the next hour, really, we want to support our understanding and share some insights into nutrition, especially around the childbearing, early parenthood, and newborn phase.
Yeah.
So really, this whole session is thinking about some of the barriers that we can all face collectively as a community and build some confidence in our practice as midwives.
Mhm.
So we're working together to think about this and think through the issues that are impacting on us.
Yeah.
So, for those of you that don't know me, haven't met me before, my name's Anna Byrom. I'm a midwife and one of the founding directors of All for Maternity, and really focus my work now is about helping everyday practitioners, midwifery practitioners, to be informed and stay up to date to improve quality care for families.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just let you
And
introduce yourself, Mary.
thank you, Anna. Yeah, and just if I may add, and you do an incredible job of that. All of your resources and all of the content has actually been really supportive for me as well. I'll introduce myself properly in a moment and say how long I've been a midwife, etc. But it has been really supportive throughout my career. And as I say, some really great resources there that are very reliable, constantly updated. So yeah, massive thanks to you and well done on that one because it's hard work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
How long have you been a midwife, now?
Yeah. Well, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Marie Louise, also known as the Modern Midwife
Yeah.
online. And I've been a midwife now for a qualified midwife for 12 years, and it's absolutely
Mm.
flown by. And when I say it, I'm like, gosh, how's that happened?
Mhm.
I have also got two books that have been published by Penguin. They're both bestsellers, so I'm really proud of that. And one fairly recently won an award. Um, yeah, so that was good. And I'm also a mum to two small children myself. And I work as an advisor for Active Iron, and I very much took their products during my pregnancy and postnatally, and I still take them now, to be honest, as well.
Yeah, and it's been so amazing to see the impact you've had supporting families because you've also got a range of courses alongside your book and resources online to support families, which it's so important. I always love seeing your updates online as well on social media with the blend of that personal insights from your own experience as a midwife and mum, but also the using evidence to inform how we communicate messages. And I think that in this information era, it can be really challenging for us as professionals, but then also for families
Yeah.
to kind of weave through and pick out what is, the factual, evidence informed, and then
Mm,
applying it to your own personal life. And I think collectively, I suppose we're working in a sort of symbiotic way to help not just the midwives and professionals, but also the families. And I
Mhm.
really value the work that you do at supporting that conversation.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And it is tricky, and as we'll discuss in the talk, the barriers that we face. I mean, there are so many in so many different ways, and in the wonderful world of social media as well. It can be difficult to approach topics that you need to approach them with honesty and integrity, but you also need to make sure that they are fully backed by evidence. And sometimes some of the things that I've been saying for years, when I actually really looked into it, I was like, oh, the evidence is actually a bit patchy here.
Yeah,
So, it is very difficult to share information in general and online. But I think that as midwives, we do have quite a fine way about us of tackling that. And so we're going to get into that a little bit more, aren't we, about breaking those barriers as well of
yeah.
communication.
Yeah, and this has become a really important topic for me over the last couple of years, working with our local system here in the Lancashire and South Cumbria, really understanding the needs of staff and
Yeah,
staff training needs, and then thinking about families, looking at the evidence in more detail, like what do we know already
yeah.
about our own nutrition, and then how do we support families with their nutrition. And I
Mm,
think whilst it's always been a part of good antenatal care, actually learning more. We're learning more all the time about the consequences of and impacts of
yeah,
messages.
yeah,
And do
yeah.
you find, I mean, I think we're also competing all the time with social media and things. So it'd be good to kind of think about some of these things. And actually, if we invite everybody that's joining us and watching live, just to really start thinking about and reflecting on yourself, I think that's a good place to start with this
Mm,
sort of topic. So as we go through, we'd really encourage you to think about your own nutrition, your own food choices, and the challenges you face personally, which I
mhm.
think helps us to think about it then for the families that we serve. So we're aiming today to focus on four kind of areas. Obviously, we want to explore why maternal nutrition matters, what are some of the challenges and opportunities to really improve and enhance nutrition across our communities. We did want to spend some time reflecting together about our own experiences, our own personal lives, our families. So we're going to spend a moment on that, and that's again an opportunity for everybody to experiences and life. And then we want to make sure that everybody watching feels really informed about the impact of maternal nutrition on health outcomes and experiences, leaving you with some tools and practical tips for midwives, or anyone really working across maternity and perinatal care. So just to position at the beginning of the session together, we know there are benefits of optimal nutrition. There's benefits for the mum, the childbearing person, the baby, and all the family. But actually, this is something that touches us all. And one of the things when we were preparing for the session, we really reflected that this is for everybody in society, for all of us as a community, and anything we've been learning that apply to childbearing women, people, and families obviously applies to us all as midwives and health professionals. We know that optimal nutrition promotes healthy growth and development for our babies, our children, but also for our adaptations during childbearing. It can reduce the risk of complications throughout the childbearing period, and it helps us to manage the extra demands of pregnancy. What a big adaptation we make during the childbearing journey. It's just incredible how our body adapts and the physiological adaptations. So, eating well and having access to nutritious food can really make a difference to improving our experiences. So we thought it'd be really important to kind of position, well, what do we mean by optimal nutrition? What are we talking about? And when we were thinking about this personally, I've learned so much about um, what we mean by healthy diet, food, and it's really shifted over my life course and actually learning about what's in front of us and what we're choosing. But when we talk about this in terms of this session, we're talking about fresh food that hasn't been highly processed. And actually, you know, it can be really hard, especially, you know, you tend to pick up things from your own cultural perspectives. Um, you can make assumptions about food and what's processed and what isn't. But actually, we really want to move to a space where we can access really fresh produce. And we're going to come on to why that can be challenging. But this is kind of that colourful plate, that colourful food, really wide variety and access to different kinds of fruit, vegetables, meat, and dairy products. So this is a picture that kind of captures some of that and what we're meaning. And what we know when we do get access to good fresh food, we then get access to really important nutrients. And we know that some of the nutrients that we do get access to from a healthy diet are especially important in pregnancy. And some of them are just listed here. And this is a bit of a refresher for those professionals on the call and for families, anyone that's joining us that might be pregnant at the moment or hoping to be, or have young children, just being aware of those nutrients that are important. So you can see here folic acid, iron, calcium, vitamin D, iodine, and zinc. These are 6 of the core micronutrients, you might refer to them, that can be supportive. And then you can see some of the kind of useful benefits or ways that they impact on our health. And what we know is that if you have a deficit or a deficiency in any of these nutrients, that can have an impact on the growth and development of the baby. So it is useful for you to be clear about that when you're a midwife and when you're practicing. So it's worth taking a moment just to make sure you feel confident in this area of your practice. So we know if you have low iron levels, for example, it can cause tiredness and fatigue, a lack of energy and poor concentration. And actually we know that iron deficiency, anemia, is one of the largest impacts of like micronutrient deficiency in the world. And so it disproportionately affects women of reproductive age. So I know we're going to sort of touch on this in more detail, but that's something that as midwives, it's really important to be aware of in our practice. So we just wanted to take a moment now to think about our life and some of the experiences we have as midwives and mothers and family members. So it'd be nice now just to chat together, Marie-Louise, about some of your life experiences and share some of mine about, you know, how we can access good nutrition as mothers and parents, and then how we can support that across our family. And then what we've learned from some of the work we've done as midwives across our experience. I was just reflecting on, you know, you've been qualified for 12 years, and it's easy for me to keep a track of how long I've been a midwife because I started my training in the year 2000. So I'm like a millennial midwife. So my career started, you know, over 25 years ago, sort of learning all these things. I can remember when I started my midwifery education, I learned so much then that hadn't felt like I'd been taught in school, or there wasn't any sort of real huge education in schools. And I know when you compare our school experiences to other countries that really invest in teaching children and helping them prepare food and teaching them about the varieties of foods, I don't recall having lots of that in my school life. I don't know, did you have any of that sort of exposure to learning about nutrition?
No, hardly any at all, to be honest. We had a DT class where to be honest, most of the time we learned about making cakes and cupcakes specifically. That's what I seem to remember.
Cookies, yeah, biscuits
Biscuits and cakes.
and scones.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think you've touched on a really important point there that I often discuss, the fact that I don't think that we educate anyone early enough about anything, but in particular health and women's health. And I actually started my first book, but part of the introduction goes into detail about the reason that I wanted to become a midwife was because no one could answer my questions. So I would ask my science teachers, but how do two cells meet, come together, and a baby is formed? How does one part know to become an arm? How does another part know to become a brain? How is the placenta formed? So I was asking all of these kinds of questions to my science teachers, and they were just like, well, we don't really know. And I was like, but this is how we are all here. How is this not common knowledge? Like, why aren't you teaching me this stuff?
I know. I can remember the first time I saw a catheter in my
Yeah,
midwifery education. I was like, how is that possible that that would fit in my urethra?
yeah,
And
yeah.
I just thought it was so big. I was like, oh my goodness. And then you don't know much about your anatomy. You don't know much about how your body works and functions.
That's it, exactly. And so we really aren't taught enough about the human body in general. And as I say, about women's health, pregnancy, birth, and beyond, and nutrition. Like, all of these parts are key factors that the vast majority of people experience, and everyone eats every day. So it's really important for us to, think about what we're putting in our bodies. Like you say, not just women. It's important, of course, that we educate women appropriately, and and we are up to date and give evidence-based information. But that good old saying, the nurturer needs to be nurtured. So if you're caring for women, you need to also think about your own nutrition, as you say, and what you're putting in your body, and how often have we got well, I used to anyway, a black coffee on the go and no breakfast until 1 p.m. And I've shoved a couple of biscuits in my face on the way. It's not uncommon. But yeah, going back to your point, I think it's really important that we do discuss nutrition more, and that we educate women and ourselves better on the topic, because it can impact every aspect and element of your health.
I know. I mean, I've got more interested in the last 5 years in the impact of poor nutrition personally for
Yeah,
me. And like you say, like that increasing, when you become a mum and a parent, and you're trying to juggle that alongside working full time. Often, most of us now have to work to sustain ourselves, and it's becoming even more challenging and pressured. That living, sort of living and working in the sort of high stress environments and having lots of cortisol in your body, which
yeah,
can have a knock-on effect to your gut health and
yeah,
your general health and well-being, but also that pressure of a busy life
yeah,
for me meant that I was making poorer decisions around the choices around food,
yeah,
grabbing quick fixes that are often very highly processed or snacky, like you were saying, grabbing a biscuit.
yeah.
I know as a midwife, when I was working clinically, I was often always having cereal. Like it felt like it was always breakfast, especially if I was doing nights or was up through the night. You feel like all you ever really want to eat is some kind of breakfast meal.
It's so true. I used to live off of granola doing nights, especially. Yeah,
And
yeah,
then obviously when I actually suffer from psoriasis, it's something that started in my teenhood years. And unfortunately, it was triggered by some little midgie bites. I mean, it's the season of midges these days, but I
yeah.
actually had some bites, like a lot, one summer when you're sort of playing out, and we live really rurally, and I got loads in my head just all at once, and it triggered an autoimmune reaction that
Oh
I've now lived with.
my
So
goodness.
it's something that I've learned lots about, and it's required me to really understand. It's an autoimmune condition.
Mm,
It's dysregulated immunity, really, and it directly affects your skin. So the visible way that you see psoriasis is overproduction of skin cells. So you see sort of red inflamed patches on your body, and but actually what's it very often with skin conditions or autoimmune conditions, it's really linked to your gut skin axis or your brain gut skin axis. So I've done lots of learning around autoimmune conditions and the links to your gut health.
yeah.
And so it's been really a big journey for me, sort of understanding it's definitely stress linked as well for
Yes.
me.
Yeah.
So, I have to think about stress.
Mm,
But then I know from when I have a flare up, another area that's hugely impactful to me, calming my immune system down is thinking about my gut health. and
Yeah.
thinking about what I eat and having an anti-inflammatory diet. And actually, when you look at that, and what you, because very often people focus on what you can't eat with an anti-inflammatory diet, but actually, if we focus on what you can eat, it pushes you really close to eating fresh
Hmm.
foods that and I've just learned so much about different kinds of food groups in my journey to healing, really. And it's a constant, ever-going thing. But I think what I've learned as well is that for what I do when I'm in a healing phase is
Mm.
relevant to everybody and anyone. You know, it's going to be beneficial to us all to
Yeah.
think about the food groups that are pro-inflammatory, such as highly processed oils,
Mm.
seed oils, sugar, refined sugar, and wheats and grains and pulses are all really challenging for somebody that has inflammatory
Yeah.
disease.
If you don't mind me asking, Anna, what does a regular day look like for you when you're, could you just talk me through a couple of things
Yeah.
you would eat in a day that are, anti-inflammatory, as you say?
Yeah, so there is some food groups that I would seek to avoid. And then obviously I've personalized it, learning about myself and what sort of
Yeah.
tends to trigger me. But if you think about what I would choose to eat to stay anti-inflammatory, it would be fresh, oily fish. So salmon, mackerel, um, white meats, chicken. Most meat is okay, but trying to avoid red meats for me can be quite triggering to eat beef. So I've just learned these things from trying different things for me personally, and then fresh fruit and all vegetables really, apart from nightshades. So
Mhm.
nightshades are vegetables such as white potatoes, onions, peppers, any kind of pepper from the pepper family. So that unfortunately includes chilies
Oh.
and like spices. So I need to avoid those.
Mhm.
And I actually can feel it now. If I have chilies, fresh chilies, it actually immediately affects my gut. I can feel
Oh,
it straight away. So
wow.
yeah, so I actually there's sort of 8 food groups that are better for me to avoid. I can have them, but I can feel them. So dairy for me, eggs and all grains, including rice. So that has been tough to change that. So I had to find replacements. And for the more starchy vegetables, I use sweet potatoes.
Nice. Yeah.
So you just have to think about alternatives. So I don't always I struggle to maintain it all the time because
Yeah.
it is I think one of the things I've noticed in my life course, I'm sort of 45 now, has been it's getting harder and harder to access fresh food that isn't packaged or in plastic wrap that
Yeah.
hasn't had pesticides on it. When you think about how we receive our vegetables, we don't even know if they've grown in soil. And we
Yeah.
know that soil itself is also, deprived of nutrients around the world. And that's another big crisis, isn't it, around access to fresh food?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And also, you touched on being time poor, which a lot of us are time poor. In particular, I do think the modern mum is juggling so much.
Mm.
Speaking from experience here, but when you go into a shop, as you say, sometimes you have to pick what's convenient, what they have in store or haven't got. And my local store doesn't hardly they don't sell hardly anything that's organic, and
No.
it's really tough some days because I need the convenience, so I need to go in there.
Mm.
I would prefer, if possible, to buy organic food, especially strawberries, because I know that they can really absorb those pesticides, and my kids love strawberries. So it can be really tough and it can be really challenging and then you've got that element of guilt as well, because I'll be shopping and I'll be putting stuff in my basket that I know isn't the best option, but I'm a time poor mum, and
Mm.
we sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And I think having an awareness is good. It can sometimes be difficult, but it is good, because then you have the capacity or opportunity to
Mm.
actually work on it. And when I do have a bit more time, or when I plan things a little bit better, then we do have the opportunity to eat foods that are better. But as you say, you can't be 100% of the time. Um,
Mm.
it is very difficult.
And when you were pregnant, for the first time and you know, how did you approach your diet and thinking about food and intake? Was it something you were conscious of? Because how old's your little girl now? How old is she?
She is 4, so
It's
I was
Georgie.
Georgie, yeah. She's 4, so I was pregnant 5 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to be working with Activine at that time. And actually, it was my relationship with them that really sparked my interest in my own nutrition during pregnancy, because I was vegan at the time. And when I was looking at all of the data and the research, you know, as I say, when I was working with them, and I was really considering what I was putting in my
Mm.
body, because I didn't receive that kind of education at school. And we touched on it a bit at university, but I certainly didn't feel particularly confident, I would say. So yeah, I did a lot of research, and I decided to start eating eggs because of the choline content in eggs. And I also, my body was craving more protein, and I could feel that as a real craving. I know some women get cravings that actually aren't helpful or nutritious, but I knew that's what my body needed. So I gave up veganism during my pregnancy, and I haven't took it up since, because my body has physically felt better. And I've had a second pregnancy since then, and I've taken, you know, as I say, Activine throughout. I am still vegetarian, so I do think that's probably part of the reason why I didn't become anemic during my pregnancy, because I had been anemic before. As a teenager, as a late teen, and in my early 20s as well. And I think that because I was prone to it, I was having heavy periods, I was vegetarian, you know, there's a couple of boxes that I ticked for it there. But fortunately, yeah, that was the decision that I made. And I definitely think it was the right decision for me personally. And I do still completely understand veganism. I understand the ethics behind it. I'm on board with those things, but I also think it's so important for us during pregnancy, as we will talk about as well. That's where health and well-being for us all starts, is in the womb. And so I really felt like I needed to listen to my body, and that's what I did, and I have no regrets.
I mean, it's making these, listening to your body and having trust in your body and what your body's pointing you to
Mm,
is a meaningful thing. And I think for any families that might be watching, it's really good to talk to your midwife, talk to your health professionals that are supporting you if you've got any queries or you're noticing even things like cravings. It's good to chat
yeah.
through and understand what's behind that sometimes, and starting to get awareness of, I really remember sort of my smells and things
Mm,
changing during pregnancy and what I chose to eat being really different.
yeah.
I experienced a hyperemesis with my littlest lad, Bill, who's born, he's now 8, but I really struggled in my pregnancy with food smells and feeling sick continuously. And that was quite challenging then to prepare food. And obviously I had Seamus and Betsy to provide food for and think about their well-being, and then also feeling so sick all the time, literally all the way through my pregnancy, unfortunately.
How
Um,
exhausting.
I mean, I think it is hyperemesis day or week, month, this month actually. So it's good to think about all the different impacts of that
Yeah.
and barriers and challenges that can contribute to, you know, impacting optimal nutrition really through the childbearing phase.
Yeah.
And it's good to think about also now as mums and caring for our children as they grow, you know, helping them make healthier choices. And now I've got teenagers and older children, like you just heard. This is what my littlest lad, he does when I'm on a call. He'll come in and ask me for things that he shouldn't have.
Yeah. He catches you while you're vulnerable. I like the strategy.
Or you're harassed in the supermarket and they're sneaking things in the basket, because
Yeah.
I suppose that's one of the challenges for us all, isn't it? That now the attract, you know, the way that companies promote their products and produce is really attractive to children, and the packaging and all the branding and things. So, you know, that's another battle that you have, don't you, when children are starting to notice that and what they want. And when they first eat something with refined sugar, then it's really hard to help them to go back to less sugary things like fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, this is something that we've definitely battled with, and as you say, in the supermarkets and things with Georgie, because I wanted to try and keep her sugar free as long as possible.
Mm.
We got to age 2, but when she was 2, we threw a big birthday party for her at our house, and of course, you know, with that, people brought stuff and whatever else. Like, you know, they brought her. My mum actually bought her a big cake, but and I said, all right, fine, we'll give it up the, you know, the sugar-free thing on her second birthday, and we had this big party for her. And since then, it's been really difficult, to be honest. And like I
Yeah.
said, she's 4 years old now. It's been very difficult to say no to her. And when we go into the supermarket and she spots those things, she's straight away, oh, mummy, can I have that? Mummy, please, can I have that? You know, and it's really hard work having to keep saying no all the time. Or when you go to other children's birthday parties or whatever, you know, I think it's so hard for mums nowadays to put those boundaries in place without seeming like, you know, you're the killjoy because, you know, sugar tastes so good, and for a short while it makes you feel good.
And remember the parenting for Seamus, my eldest, who was born in 2005. So he's coming up to being 20 this year, which is just wild to me. But I was so conscious about every decision I made. You know, he was carried around in a sling all the time, and I had cloth nappies for him, and it was just using like sort of essential oils, tea tree and lavender to clean them, and really being conscious of what sort of toxins he was exposed to.
Yeah,
And like you with Georgie, just really, he didn't have access, little bits of things maybe from, like you say, family members that might care for him as he got a bit older, but he didn't have access to sugar. And, you know, it's then as you have more children and life becomes so busy, it's really hard to sustain that. I
it is.
found with and I've got a little more relaxed. But I honestly also feel in that 20-year period that it's also become harder and harder to get fresh food without traveling to supermarkets. And over my life course, you know, supermarkets have become bigger and further away from your local area.
Yeah.
And now if you go to corner shops or if you go to even our local spa, the size of the fresh food area has got smaller and smaller and smaller, and the food isn't replaced frequently, so it's quite old. And it's just if you have to make a quick
Yeah.
nip to the shop or you haven't got access to a vehicle, these are all really big challenges, aren't they, for us as parents now?
Yeah, they absolutely are. Yeah.
So I put a picture up of Betsy there, my daughter. We've been starting to think about can we make food from scratch, but again, that requires quite a lot of time. So I just thought I'd put that up because we wanted to make our own bread. I'm actually from a family of bakers. So my grandma, my mum's mum, had a bakery. And my auntie and my mum's sisters, they were all amazing cooks and really great at making food. And my auntie started a sourdough starter, and then it passes it around the family. And actually, my brother's a chef, a head chef in a local restaurant, and he uses my auntie's sourdough starter for all the breads he makes at the Italian restaurant that he works at. So I
How
just
lovely though that recipe has lived on.
I
What a
know.
legacy.
I know, but then I think for me, I know that bread obviously is a bit of a nemesis and
Yeah,
grains, and it is a processed food because it's such a sort of staple for many diets across the world, bread. But
yeah,
actually, we don't think of it necessarily as a processed food, but it is. And it's the hidden things, isn't it, in food that we're reaching for now that we don't even know that are there, like you said, the
yeah,
sort of pesticides that they use in farming to keep off the bugs. You don't know what's actually on your food. Even if you're making what looks to be healthy decisions, you
Mhm.
can sort of equally be limited like that when we don't know what's in our basket.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be good to kind of think about pulling some of our experiences into the wider evidence base, and what we know of some of the wider challenges for families. And we're kind of focusing this on the UK context, but many of these things are also linked to the global picture as well. And we know, obviously, globally, when we look at the global picture around maternal nutrition, that continues to be huge inequities in our well-being and access. But actually, we know that suboptimal maternal nutrition is an issue for us all around the world. So sometimes that suboptimal nutrition is, you know, we're not getting access to food. We know that globally, it's a massive concern for the World Health Organization. But when we look into the UK context, we've got that increased cost of living. We've talked together about the food deserts that we're seeing. That's a term that's used to explain how difficult it can be to access fresh food. My lovely cousin, who works in America, she came over to the UK actually because she's a farmer. And she she does work in inner city areas, just talking about these food deserts and how it's really difficult to grow food in a city, in urban areas. And so she does lots of work with urban farming. So she came and worked at a Sure Start where I was the midwife in Lambeth, and they had a community farm as part of the Sure Start. So there are people trying to support this and make a difference. But we know that as well as, not having good access to food per se, and, we've got areas in the world where people don't have actually access to food at all. So are starving, and there's a massive impact on people's health and well-being. But then we've also conversely got the challenge of rising body mass and body weight and over access and over consumption of food that can all impact on nutritional deprivation. We've talked about the unequal access to fresh and processed foods, and also the challenges of being able to access up-to-date information. I think with the rise of social media has also come some myths emerging and people talking about nutrition to promote certain products or to promote certain initiatives. And then there's all the fad diets that come out, and things that maybe aren't always evidence informed. So there is a need to improve our education and access to evidence informed education, not just for families, but for healthcare professionals too. So we feel confident opening conversations and personalised conversations with family. So we know that if we do have suboptimal nutrition during childbearing, we can then lack some key nutrients, like we talked about those 6 key nutrients that we mentioned at the beginning. If we have any nutritional deprivation, that can lead to various negative outcomes for both us as childbearing women and people and babies. So there are risks to us as individuals, and there can be an increase in adverse birth outcomes, but also those longer term implications for our families. So when we're looking at maternal health implications, we know that nutrient deficiencies, including anemia, can have an impact on preparation for birth, and obviously can impact our everyday experiences of childbearing and our general well-being, including tiredness, dizziness, and feeling unwell. We also know, though, that if we have any deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, it can increase our chance of having preeclampsia. And we still don't know fully why these links, we don't know. We're still researching and trying to find out more about the causes of preeclampsia, which is a pregnancy-induced condition. But we know that you have got an increased chance if you've got any micronutrient deficiencies. There's increased risk of complications during delivery and increased maternal mortality associated with poor nutrition. So these are important things for us as childbearing women people. There can be adverse birth outcomes as well for people, for babies, if there is maternal nutrition deficit. So these are the things listed here, such as low birth weight, preterm birth and stillbirth, and babies that are small for gestational age or growth restricted in some way. So that's important for us to be aware that obviously like Mary Louise said, that, you know, if we, whatever we're putting into our bodies as mums will directly impact the nutritional status and growth of our babies. So there's that direct correlation. So it is important that we take time to think about this in our work. And obviously, there is that long term, we're building our awareness and understanding of the long term health implications for children and us throughout our life course. We are learning so much more now about the long term consequences of ongoing and consistent deprivation and nutritional deficits. So these are some that we're being mapped to the evidence. So increased risk of chronic disease, poor neurodevelopment, wasting and stunting, micronutrient deficiencies, lifelong, and impact on school readiness, enrollment, and learning performance. So it's kind of having an impact on our health and then our social and educational well-being as well. So for those of you on the call that really want to learn more about nutrition beyond this session, there are a range of tools and resources that you can access. These are things that we use in our practice as midwives, myself and Mary Louise. We refer people to them. I was an infant feeding specialist and then coordinator in clinical practice as my last clinical leadership role, and got really interested in those early choices for families and how we best support families with those decisions, and then really care for them practically, because it's easy to tell people what they should do, but how do we support people to sustain that approach for any choice that we make? How do we wrap around families to really better care for them? So these are things that I've used throughout my career that I find really helpful. Obviously, we get regular updates and support through the government. And so please do look out for the Public Health England resources, but also the wider government information, especially around statistics and things like that. It's good to have a look and be up to date and aware. And then look for your local data as well. What are things that are impacting families in your locality? Do you work rurally? Do you work in urban inner city areas? What's the communities that you're serving? What are the cultural needs? What are people generally eating? What are their cultural diets? You kind of want to know about your local community, and go and speak to your local community as well, and get to know each other. And then thinking about the peer-to-peer support opportunities that are available. You know, we want to have really helpful conversation starters. And that's one of the things we learned from our local study, talking to staff, was that staff can really struggle with knowing how to approach conversations around weight, how to approach conversations around diet, especially if you're finding it difficult yourself to make choices that are supportive of your own nutritional status and well-being, like me and Mary Louise have talked about. So we have shared a tool where we can think about that. The First Steps Nutrition is an amazing resource that can support you to support families, but also all the families listening. You can go and access that resource to give you really evidence-informed and up-to-date information. And they also do quite a lot of lobbying around misinformation that can be out there that can really confuse you when you're making choices around your own diet and then also your child's food. Obviously, we've got information support around active iron, and they have a range of products that can support families and midwives and staff as well. And I know, Mary Louise, you're going to talk about that in more detail. We've also put together a course, a free course that you can take for those of you on the call. If you're not watching on your mobile, you can do the QR code here and get access to a free course thinking about in more detail the most common micronutrient deficiency, so iron deficiency. So that goes into more detail about the consequences and implications throughout childbearing and beyond. So do feel free. And then thinking about handing over now to Mary Louise, just to think about the role of supplementation in pregnancy and how we can offer that meaningful support to families in our work as midwives.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Anna. So can you see me on screen, by the way? Because I can't. Oh, you can see me on screen. Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, so the role of supplementation in pregnancy can be really important, as we know, and as we've talked about, and as we've learnt about in the early slides. But in particular, there are some key nutrients that we really need. So that being vitamin D, that being folate, and also that being iron. Now, we're often, we're used to telling women all about vitamin D and folate or folic acid in its synthetic form, but I'll mention briefly as well about the most bioavailable form that comes with active iron. But yeah, we're really confident talking about those things, but I think less so talking about iron, and seen as it is, up to 50% of women are iron deficient, and up to 20 to 25% of women enter into pregnancy with anemia already. So that is a huge statistic. And I think it's so important that we have these early conversations with women, not just about, vitamin D and folate, but actually having these early conversations about iron and getting women thinking about, other supplementations that they may need throughout their pregnancy. All supplementations are not manufactured equally. Active iron has some particular unique selling points or particular positive points for us to consider as well. And the fact that it is based on clinical evidence. So not all supplements are based on clinical evidence. This is really important for us as clinicians to inform women about this as well. And also, as I mentioned before, the best, most available forms of nutrients. So this is something that Active Iron in particular do really well because their supplements are manufactured in a particular way. And their pregnancy supplement now, that's actually just fairly recently come out that I was really excited to see, has a triple layer. And these vitamins are therefore released at different times, so they don't conflict with each other, and it enables the body to actually absorb them, because you can take these supplementations, but actually if they're not being absorbed appropriately, they're not doing anything. And a lot of women think, oh, I'm taking my supplements, that's fine, but actually they don't know those finer details, and those are really, really important things. The other thing is, talking about iron specifically, is the fact that most iron supplements do come with some sort of side effect. And in particular, we know when we give high dose ferrous sulfate, the vast majority of women will have some sort of negative symptom. And a lot of women are suffering, as Anna mentioned, with hyperemesis, with other pregnancy sickness, or just, nausea in general. The last thing that they then want to have is an upset tummy. So their formula is non-constipating, and that is also clinically proven. And as I've mentioned before, the biologically active L-methylfolate, that is really important. I've got a whole article on Active Iron's website. If you go into the healthcare professional section, there's a whole article on that with the latest data and research behind why it is important for women to consider what kind of supplements they're taking and ensure that those are provided in the most bioavailable form. And as I've already mentioned, the time release as well. That's with the pregnancy, their new pregnancy product. So the importance of iron at each life stage. We touched on earlier how we don't have much education in our earlier years and throughout school. And we very rarely talk about the importance of iron before girls start their periods. And again, it's important because during adolescence, you are going through a huge growth accelerative period, and you're going through a massive hormonal shift. Often they're taking exams, and it can be a really tough time. So if on top of that, young girls are starting their period, they're becoming anemic, they're getting brain fog, and when actually this could potentially be prevented through education and potentially through supplementation if they are getting particularly heavy periods, for example. So it is important that we're having these early conversations because there is a massive unmet need for women in particular. As we know, iron deficiency anemia affects women far more than it does men. So yeah, preconception is an important time, pregnancy, and also perimenopause as well. So sometimes during the perimenopause stage, we know a lot about pregnancy and the iron requirements for pregnancy. We're going to talk a bit more about that and postpartum, but going across to perimenopause, often as well, before women do go through the menopause and their periods stop, they can get really heavy bleeding, and hardly anyone speaks to women that are experiencing this about iron intake and about how important that is if you are getting those kinds of really heavy periods. And as I said, we'll go into detail more about pregnancy and postpartum, but you have that whole kind of like life cycle of a woman, really, and the importance of iron requirements throughout the life cycle.
And I was actually thinking, Mary Louise, that people don't always know that they've got heavy periods throughout their
Yeah.
reproductive phase, and it's really useful to be aware of like what that actually means, or what we're referring to, because it is often self-defined, but if you don't know because you've always had heavy periods,
Yes.
talking about where it's affecting your quality of life, where you might have to be wearing multiple sanitary products.
Yeah.
I think just if you are suspecting that you might experience really heavy periods, it can be worth, like you said before, that you've experienced anemia in your life.
Yeah.
It can be worth getting things like checked out, not just during the childbearing phase, but like you say, all through your life. If you've got young teenagers, girls that are starting their periods, or you're supporting your friends, like I'm just entering perimenopause now, and it's really good to be aware of those symptoms and signs as well of iron deficiency anemia, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it exactly. It is recognizing those as well. And my sister is happy with me sharing this story, but she has heavy periods, and we just never really discussed it before. And then very recently, around about 6 months ago, she became quite unwell, and she was getting all of the classic signs and symptoms of anemia, and she was unaware of those, which I was surprised by, because I thought, even as her sister, that I talk about this quite frequently, we're really close. And we were on the phone one day, and she's like, I'm absolutely exhausted after work. I have to go and have a sleep, and then I will sleep for 12 hours after that. And she had various other symptoms as well. And I then spoke to her about her periods and her diet and whatever else. And I said, I think you've got quite severe anemia, Catherine. Anyway, she went to the doctors, and it turns out she did have severe anemia. I sort of felt a little partially responsible, because I thought, I should have explained these things more to her. And when we talked about her periods, they were really heavy. And I said, that's not normal. And she said, well, how would I know what's normal? Because I don't know, I don't really talk to many people about it. And I don't see other my friends on their periods. So, I don't see what kind of blood loss they experience. So, unless you talk about it, you don't know. So yeah, anyway, and the good news is she's now not so anemic, and she's taking active iron as well to keep up that maintenance dose, and she's very happy with me now, so that's good. So moving on, and talking a bit more detail about active iron. So as I mentioned before, not all iron supplements are manufactured equally, and the thing that really active iron outshines other supplementations is with their groundbreaking patented formula. So the capsule itself is wrapped in a protein, and also a chain of fatty acids. And what that does is that prevents oxidation in the stomach. Now, oxidation in the stomach is it's not ideal for women, because that is when you get those increased symptoms that we discussed, that nausea, constipation, any kind of gastro symptoms that can be as a result of oxidation. So it bypasses and it goes to the site of absorption, which is, again, not just for the symptom side of things, but actually that is where iron is best absorbed. So it targets that area specifically, and there aren't other supplementations that do that. With regards to the evidence that I talked about earlier, and how important that is for us to share data with women as well, because if we're making recommendations and claims, it is important that we have an understanding around that. So active iron is more bioavailable, and is actually 2 times better absorbed. Compliance. So as you know, lots of women will end up not taking their ferrous sulfate, or they'll take kind of sporadically or randomly, so therefore it doesn't really work and get their iron levels up. But actually with active iron, there is 4 times better compliance, and I am pretty sure that's because there's a reduction in symptoms, and there's 6 times less gut irritation. So of course we're going to see better compliance if women aren't getting symptoms, because most women want the best for themselves and for their baby. But if you're experiencing these really difficult symptoms, you've got a difficult choice to make. Efficacy as well, 94% increase in iron levels in 6 weeks, which, you know, that speaks for itself really. And energy, increased energy and fights fatigue as well. So that was the reports from those that took part in that study. And that study was taken a few years ago now, when I think people were quite exhausted anyway, after COVID and around COVID and the restrictions and all of that. But that set aside, the reports where there was still an increase in energy level and fatigue. Again, on the topic of clinical studies, this is something that Activine do really well, and they are currently, I'm really excited about this, they're currently undertaking a clinical study at Ulster University with pregnant women. Which, as we know, collecting data on pregnant women can be notoriously difficult. So yeah, that's why I was really excited about this study. The aim is to assess the impact of supplementation with Activine on iron status in pregnant women, with the aim of improving health of pregnant women and therefore, of course, their infants. So already they've recruited 100 women, and that started in mid-June. They're going to continue to recruit throughout 2025, and around about 300 mums will be involved. So I'm really excited to see some of the results of that, and I don't doubt for a moment that they will, you know, confirm all of the previous findings. But it is really important, again, for us, if we are making recommendations, for us to have data that backs that up. So yes, watch this space. And Activine do have a range for women's health in general. So they have their advanced product. This is the product actually that I take most days. And I have not had any symptoms at all. As someone who has had a history of anemia and has had to take ferrous sulfate, I can confirm those symptoms are really uncomfortable. But I don't have any symptoms at all with the advanced product. And they have, as I mentioned as well, the pregnancy product. So their new product now that's just recently come out is very unique because it has that multi-layer, and therefore all of the nutrients and the vitamins are not competing with each other, and they're absorbed at different times, and that is really important as well, as I mentioned, to maximize the absorption. And, you know, therefore, if women are spending money on supplementation, we want to make sure that they are working accurately and effectively. And then the biologically or most bioavailable form is in folates. They've got the active folic, as Activine brand it. And as I mentioned before, it is important that we educate. There's a lot of misinformation online about this. It is important that we educate women so that they can make an informed decision. And I do have a whole paper that goes into great detail. So if you are interested in it, then please go and have a little look at that as well. And I think you're muted, Anna, but yeah,
thank you.
That's okay. But thanks so much. Thanks for listening as well.
It's wonderful to be able to explore opportunities and what's available to help with the challenges that families are facing. So thank you for sharing the insight into what's available. And we're really lucky that all of our members, you know, obviously for midwives, many midwives are women or people that may be experiencing, you know, their own challenges with iron deficiency anemia. And all of our members get a special discount in the member zone of our site. So anyone that's listening that is a member, go over and see, and you can access some of those resources so we can stay well as caregivers. So we have been receiving some comments as we've been chatting. For people that have joined us live, thank you so much. Please feel free to pop some questions into the chat now if you've got any specific questions for myself or Mary-Louise. But just to share some comments with you, Mary-Louise, that Paul's kindly shared with me. So Genevieve Stones mentioned that knowing about the nutrients is fine, but they need converting into foods. So that pregnant women know which foods to include in their diet. So maybe what we could do is talk about some of those foods. And I think it is important when we're having conversations, we actually invite families to share with us what foods they are eating most commonly and usually, what foods are important to them in their own family, you know, diet, it's so culturally influenced how we eat and how we're brought up with food and our relationship with food. So I think, first of all, finding out what foods people generally eat and what they already know is a good starting point, isn't it? But what kinds of foods would be rich in, say, iron, for example, or can help us to increase our vitamin D? It's good to kind of have some awareness of those, isn't it, as health professionals? What
Mhm.
sort of things would you share with families in your practice as a midwife?
Yeah, so as you said, I think it's important to start off with what they're already doing, and sometimes it is difficult to navigate those conversations because if the information that you
Mm.
receive from them isn't necessarily ideal, then kind of like making sure that you address that and you delve into that, but respectfully, because you need to be able to build relationships with women so that they trust you, and they trust what you're saying to them, and it doesn't feel like a bashing, because I think when it comes to nutrition and weight and those kinds of conversations, it can be quite difficult, and they can also be quite overwhelmed during pregnancy as well, so they get so much information. So I personally, I tend to gauge it on what the woman tells me and how open she is at that time to really delve into nutrition. And if she wants to talk about it, I'll go into great detail and we'll have these conversations. And some women are very open to learning more and to kind of like changing certain things that they could do to improve their nutrition, whereas other women, I know that the door's shut for that moment in time. So I'll touch on it and I'll talk about those key nutrients that are really important to consider. We'll talk about supplementation, that kind of thing, but then I will be respectful and park it if it's
Yeah.
obvious. And sometimes that's hard because you want to say, well, you really need to look at this and change this. But if that's not what they are prepared to do, you have to know where the boundary is, don't you?
I think so. And I think it's kind of because if you're wanting to, for example, use your diet to increase your iron stores, then you'd be looking to discuss the importance of accessing green leafy vegetables. We know as well that red meat and certain meat products would be supportive in helping with that dietary access to iron. And
Yeah.
then vitamin D can come through the food chain. Obviously, we know that vitamin D is something that we produce in response to sunlight.
Hmm.
And the foods that, fresh foods again through the meat chain. And that's because animals that have been exposed to light would have high vitamin D. So we can get it through fish and meat. But
Yeah.
again, those when some of our approaches to farming, those meat produce might not have seen much light, so they will also have low vitamin D levels. And
Yes.
again, the same with veg. Sometimes now we're
Yeah.
growing veg in vacuums or in, big buildings, really. So access to natural light is limited.
Mm,
So frequently people need to consider supplementation as well for vitamin D. And
yeah.
so it's important to be thinking of the wider social restrictions. If we're living in the Northern Hemisphere like we do,
Mm,
our access to healthy levels of vitamin D is quite low. And
yeah.
then displacement of people, when we're caring for families that might be displaced through to conflict and war, refugees, asylum seekers, people that are coming that are usually would be living in areas where they get high sunlight and have adapted, their skin's adapted to allow for that. They might struggle then in areas of the world where it's really difficult to access levels of vitamin D. And
Mm,
so we have to consider those sorts of things. And then kind of what we wear and the conflict sometimes with sunscreen and making sure we protect our skin from cancer, but then that balancing act of wanting to expose yourself to vitamin D as well.
yeah, exactly. It's very tricky. Sorry, I've just realized I think I misunderstood the question. I thought you were asking me about how I approach nutrition in general, but you meant more specifically the nutritional
Yeah, I
information.
think Genevieve had put that what foods, how do we convert what's nutritionally needed, like
Yeah.
the micronutrient we need, to what foods families can choose that would help them.
Yes.
But then Terry Gavin Jones also talked about, because we know how challenging it can be with the cost of living crisis for families to even have money to spend on rising costs of food, like food costs, fresh food, organic food, it costs so much. I can't afford to purchase food like, myself and for my family. I know those people accessing food banks. How can we help people make choices when they go to a food bank or when they're having to feed their family?
Mm.
What sorts of tips can we think about when caring for families that might struggle with those choices or access?
Yeah. And I think actually that picture that you showed earlier on, sometimes, as you know, that good old saying, a picture says 1,000 words. And I think, going back to basics, because it can be very overwhelming, but going back to basics and showing people pictures, okay, this, I know we see all of these high processed foods and things, but if you are, getting food from food banks, here are some of the better choices that you could make. And yeah, I think sometimes being simple, taking it back to basics, actually is very helpful for people as well.
Yeah, and I think I have a really helpful book or follow a person that I've forgotten her name now, it's gone out of my head, but I'll find it and make sure it's put with the resource links.
Mm.
But she talks about how you can use tinned foods and
Yeah.
frozen foods. And whilst obviously you'd want to choose fresh foods, that sometimes, especially in the freezing process, quite a lot of nutrients are retained that can be supportive. And thinking about what we eat isn't just for the micronutrients, it's also for the fibre and the roughage that's good for your gut health as well. And making sure that you have regular bowel movements, which is good generally for your gut health. So it's helping people understand what would be better choices and what would be suitable alternatives if there is challenges to access to food. And I
Yeah.
think that can be something that I really found helpful in the book of how you can, I think it's Jack, her name is Jack, and she
Right.
does how you can cook on a budget, how
Yeah.
you can eat as healthily as possible if you're
Yeah.
if you're struggling with that.
Yeah, one of my friends has a great account as well, who's a nutritionist, Charlotte Sterling Reed. She mainly specializes in weaning for babies, but she also talks a lot about that for parents and families, and like bulk cooking and freezing, because it is very cost effective. And also, as you said, with freezing, it does maintain those nutrients as well. So she does have some great tips on her page as well that I've actually used with my own kids.
Yeah, really helpful to think about that together and collectively. And I think that's the other area that people are mentioning in the comments is that there can be real barriers to accessing clinical pathways for nutrition support. So if you identify a family that might benefit from nutrition support, this remains patchy access to wider support services.
Mm.
And that's something that I think collectively it would be good to focus on that as a community, thinking
Yeah.
about how we can offer more support. Where I live, there has been good support in Lancashire and South Cumbria around nutrition, and there is access to dietitians and services. And I know some of the family hubs now
Mhm.
do have access to support. And then
Yeah.
we've got the Better Start and the Healthy Start campaigns, and some families get access to vitamins during
Yes. I was just
childbearing pregnancy, don't they? Which is
Yeah,
good.
and vouchers as well, so that can be really helpful, especially at the moment.
And then there's a question now that's just popped through for you, Mary Louise, about how the study that you've mentioned will differentiate the use of active iron with other types of iron. So, do you know about the actual sort of methodology of the study and how it's kind of comparing itself to other sources of iron?
Yep. So it's a double-blind, randomized control trial. So really good quality data that's being collected. And what they're not testing against any other iron. They're looking at how active iron can improve iron levels and therefore overall women's and babies' health. And the data is going to be collected at multiple time points. So it'll be collected at 12 weeks, at 28 weeks, 36 weeks, and also, interestingly, some cord blood at birth, and then 6 weeks postnatally as well. So, again, if we're looking at long-term trajectory and overall health and well-being for women, looking at that 6 weeks postnatal check, this is something that I often talk about as well, is I think that we should routinely do an FBC at 6 weeks, because a woman might not meet the criteria for a PPH or anemia, and she might appear to have normal levels, but actually, is that normal for her? Because if you've got a woman who is 5 foot and loses 500 mils, you might go, oh, okay, she's sort of like borderline, we'll see how she does in the first 24 hours. Oh, she's okay, discharge her. And actually, as she continues to bleed postnatally, her iron levels may drop. So I'm really interested to see the results as well at 6 weeks postnatally.
Can I just ask, so the control group would be not taking active iron? So
yeah,
so the comparative then is between people taking active iron supplements compared to a control group of stuff that aren't. So that's just to answer. I think that should clarify for you, Rebecca Jarman. But obviously in the
we're not
future,
taking any other iron supplements. It's iron or active iron or not. Yeah.
yeah, and that could be something in the future that is a consideration, but this one is just looking at that intervention, and it is really hard to plan trials with any intervention, because obviously around the supplementation, we know that our diets can really vary massively as well, but
Yeah,
it's
there's
any evidence
other
that we
variables.
gather has limitations, doesn't it? And it has strengths and benefits, and we can learn something from it. But being aware of the limitations is useful for us in our practice as midwives
Yeah.
alongside the benefits. So at least I always think that when you are doing a randomized controlled trial that's blind, it
Mm,
does help us to learn a bit more than as if you weren't and you were just doing um, a case study or case reviews. So
yes.
it's be like you said before, it's good to see evidence emerging
Yeah.
that's looking at it with that more robust methodology.
Yes, that's exactly. And as you say, all research has its limitations. That's always going to be the case. But having some evidence, because a lot of brands do not have evidence to support certain claims that they make. So yeah.
Yeah, good. It's good to have that available. And I
Hmm.
think you mentioned, didn't you, for anyone that wants to read more, there is a health professional area on the Activine website where you mentioned a few times the resource you've put together of the evidence. So if people want to
Yeah.
go and read more, that's available to you. And then there's just some other comments that have been made just as we draw to a close. Obviously, we could continue this. This is an important topic, and we are going to be running a professional seminar in July to delve more deeply into this. And I've been lucky to work at the maternal and infant and parent nutrition and nurture unit in my work at the University of Central Lancashire when I was a midwifery educator and researcher there, and did my PhD actually in that unit. And they've just had their recent conference, but I've worked with some of the researchers in that unit to try and really understand. And it's good to know that there are researchers that are focusing on maternal and infant nutrition
Mm,
and nurture, because it isn't just about the nutrition, it's how do we nurture people in our community and society, and
yeah.
nurture parents as they're making decisions and choices, not just about how to feed ourselves and our babies and our infants, but how do we then move on to our food groups with our children, when we're adding foods at
Yeah.
that sort of 6 month window and beyond. So there's lots of those things that we can unpack together in the seminar, which I'll look forward to. But I think there was Linda Pasqui mentioned about the Healthy Start vitamins in her locality. She's in Newham.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Oh, brilliant. Oh, she's in Newham. Yeah, that's not too far from me. Yeah.
And that, so it's good to look out for that, and make sure if you are a midwife or a health visitor or somebody working with families, that you're aware of what's available in your locality. But
Yeah.
families looking out for that and asking their midwives and GPs and professionals that are caring for them. And
Exactly. It can be that good old postcode lottery, can't it? So you can move from one county to the next, and and actually there is a variation in what's available, and as we well know, policies and guidelines. So yeah, I think
yeah,
that's an important note as well, to update yourself. And things change all the time as well, don't they? So Mm.
We do. And Linda also mentioned about the challenges of stigma or misconceptions that we touched on briefly around nutrition and weight during pregnancy. And we know when it comes to weight, we are using, quite outdated ways of monitoring and measuring people's weight. So we have to be aware of the limitations of some of our metrics and measurements, certainly, but also some of the wider societal pressure on how we look and how we
Yes.
should look, that's very, again, culturally influenced. There's times throughout society where it was, considered good to be overweight, and then
Mm.
there's times where it's been aspirational to be underweight and look super thin. And so there is big challenges. Not when we talk about food, it's associated with those issues as well. And we didn't have quite the time today to delve into those areas, but that is something that, as midwives and as health professionals, being aware of those influences is
Yeah.
really critical during childbearing as well, because we know
Yeah.
that also impacts mental health and well-being.
Yeah, and part of our job as midwives as well, I think, is to really support women to trust themselves and build a positive relationship with themselves if they don't have one already. So as I mentioned before, sometimes it can feel like a telling off, or
Yeah.
so. But actually, what we're here to do is, yes, provide evidence-based factual information, but also have a good understanding of when actually what this mum really needs is, a lot of nurturing and a bit of TLC, and then maybe we can approach these topics a little bit later on, for example. So I think it can be so tricky to gauge, and I've had several tricky conversations with mums in practice, and and you're sort of navigating your way through as you go, because I don't think there's necessarily a script that you can follow, and that can be tricky as midwives. I totally empathize. But I think, yeah, as I say, a big part of our job is actually to lift women up and to nurture their self-trust and their ability in themselves, because that's really, what they're imparting on their babies, and their journey through motherhood that's ever evolving.
Yeah, it is. And I think it'd be good to keep the conversation going. So I
Mm.
think we've referred to some resources. Obviously, there's other things that it'd be good to hear and for people to share in the chat, and then on the social channels that we share, if people have got meaningful resources that have helped them in their practice,
Yes.
please look out for those. We will be making those available for everybody that's registered and might be catching up with the recording. Please look out for the links that we've shared in the emails that you'll have been sent. Rebecca Jarman's actually mentioned there is also a PANDA study that's looking at routine iron supplementation in pregnancy that's currently recruiting. So there's other research that's ongoing. I'm sure
Great.
globally there'll be lots of research that's been undertaken as well, because we need to think about different community groups, different people, people that are from minoritized communities. What, how are we understanding that differentiation, if there is any, in terms of care and support, thinking about different food groups that are eaten with different cultural settings and contexts.
Yeah.
And then Linda's just mentioned that she's actually a lead Healthy Start Vitamins for Newham University Hospital.
Oh, brilliant.
They have a Healthy Start prepaid card for food, milk, and vegetables. So you can see that there is some brilliant work going on in local areas. So, like we said before, just urging people to go and find out what's available in your locality.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much to everybody that's joined us live. We hope by opening the conversation, we can learn more together and focus on that wider learning from this. So hopefully the resources that you can access will be supportive. We did create at Lancashire and South Cumbria system. We did create a toolkit that you can use with some PowerPoints and educations and tools for education and having conversations with families. So please feel free to use that. That will be circulated with the link. And like I said, we've got the free course you can take at the All for Maternity Hub. So
Brilliant.
if you just search hub.all for maternity, you'll be able to access the free course on there, which we'd really encourage people to do. That focuses specifically on iron deficiency anemia and the impact and consequences in childbearing.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anna. And yeah, thanks so much for all of the questions and
Yeah.
discussions. It is such an important topic, and I really appreciate your time. I know we're all busy. So I really appreciate your time, everyone, to attend. And yeah, absolute pleasure. I learned a lot, as always, from you, Anna. And thanks for sharing your story as well, and your personal
Yeah,
story.
you too.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
really,
good to think about, we are the people we care for. That's what I always think, we are part of the communities that we serve. And
yeah,
a big thanks as well to the Maternity and Midwifery Forum for hosting this discussion and conversation and education information session. It's really great that they're making this resource freely available. So we hope people can
yeah,
access it beyond those registered, and look out for it across our social channels. And we'll be sharing links to the recordings. So
brilliant.
I hope everybody has a lovely afternoon
Yep,
and
yeah,
can enjoy some of the sunshine, get some vitamin D.
yeah, exactly. Topical.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much,
Thank you
everybody.
so
Have a
much.
lovely afternoon. Bye.